Aliens expected humans to beg, but Earth's defiance shocked the Galactic Council. The ultimatum arrives. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through 17 different communication channels to ensure Earth couldn't claim they hadn't received it. Captain Maria Rodriguez stood in the United Earth Defense Command Center, watching the holographic projection of Ambassador Crix Theta, Supreme Representative of the Stellar Confederacy. The alien's crystalline form shimmered with what humans had learned meant barely contained irritation. Earth and its colonies had exactly 90 standard galactic days to surrender all mining rights in the Sol System's asteroid belt. The Stellar Confederacy, representing 200 civilized worlds, had decided that humanity's rapid expansion into resource extraction was destabilizing regional markets. The solution was simple. Humans would step aside and allow Confederacy corporations to manage these resources for the greater good. Maria turned to her team of advisors, a mix of military personnel, diplomats, and scientists from every major Earth, nation, and colony. The diversity in the room was striking, not just in human terms, but in how differently they all approached this crisis. Some wanted immediate compliance to avoid conflict. Others suggested negotiation. A few proposed military preparations. Dr. James Chen, Earth's leading xenopsychologist, raised his hand. The Confederacy expects us to follow their standard protocol. Every species before us has either negotiated down to partial compliance or accepted their terms entirely. They've been doing this for 8,000 years. And what happens to species that refuse? Asked General Nikolai Volkov, his Russian accent thick with skepticism. Chen pulled up historical data on his tablet. No one has ever completely refused. The few who tried to negotiate too aggressively faced economic isolation until they complied. The Confederacy controls most trade routes and communication networks in this sector. Maria studied the data, her mind racing through possibilities. Humanity had made incredible technological advances since first contact 12 years ago, but they were still newcomers to the galactic stage. The Confederacy had experience, resources, and the backing of 200 worlds. On paper, resistance seemed foolish, yet something in her gut rebelled against the idea of submission. Maybe it was her grandmother's stories of standing up to bullies in her Mexican village. Maybe it was humanity's long history of fighting against impossible odds. Or maybe it was just pure, simple stubbornness. "What if we don't respond at all?" she asked suddenly. The room fell silent. Admiral Sarah Mitchell from the Mars colony leaned forward. "You mean ignore them?" "Not ignore. Just don't engage, don't accept, don't refuse, don't negotiate. Act as if the message never arrived." Volkov laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "You want to ghost the most powerful alliance in the galaxy?" Dr. Amara Okonkwo from the Nigerian Science Institute stood up. "It's actually brilliant. The Confederacy's entire power structure relies on other species acknowledging their authority. If we don't acknowledge it, we're not playing their game," Chen finished, his eyes lighting up with understanding. "Their protocols, their timeline, their rules, none of it matters if we don't participate." The debate raged for hours. Representatives from Earth's nations and colonies connected via quantum communication, each adding their voice to the discussion. The Luna City Council worried about economic consequences. The Mars Terraforming Committee feared military retaliation. The asteroid belt miners themselves were split between those who wanted to fight and those who wanted to flee. But as the discussions continued, a consensus began to emerge. Humanity had always been at its best when united against external pressure. Whether it was natural disasters, pandemics, or world wars, humans had a peculiar talent for setting aside differences when faced with existential threats. President Elena Vasquez of United Earth made the final decision after consulting with all colony leaders. "We proceed with normal operations. No response to the Confederacy. No acknowledgement of their ultimatum. We continue mining, trading with independent species, and developing our defenses. If they want to stop us, they'll have to make the first aggressive move." The decision sent shockwaves through human space. Some called it brave, others called it suicidal. The media dubbed it the Great Silence, and debate raged on every platform about whether humanity was standing up for principles or racing toward destruction. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez was put in charge of a special task force. Their mission was classified at the highest level: prepare for every possible Confederacy response while maintaining the appearance of normal operations. She assembled the best minds from across human space, including experts in warfare, psychology, technology, and even philosophy. Dr. Chen became her closest advisor, helping her understand Confederacy psychology. "They're used to fear responses," he explained during one late-night strategy session. "Every species either immediately complies out of fear or tries to negotiate out of desperation. They have protocols for both. But silence? They have no protocol for silence." The team worked around the clock, developing contingency plans for economic blockades, military strikes, and diplomatic pressure. But their greatest weapon wasn't military might or clever strategy. It was humanity's peculiar psychological makeup. Humans, as it turned out, were unique in the galaxy for their ability to maintain cognitive dissonance. They could hold two contradictory ideas simultaneously: that the Confederacy was overwhelmingly powerful, and that their authority was completely illegitimate. This mental flexibility allowed them to prepare for war while genuinely continuing normal life. The asteroid miners kept mining. Trade ships kept flying their routes. Children went to school learning about both Earth history and galactic civilizations. Life continued as if the most powerful alliance in known space hadn't just delivered an ultimatum. This normalcy wasn't an act. It was genuine. Humans had decided, collectively and almost instinctively, that the Confederacy's demands were simply irrelevant to their daily lives. Like spam email or aggressive advertising, the ultimatum was filtered out of conscious consideration. As days turned into weeks, something interesting happened. Other species began to notice. The Vrek, who traded regularly with human colonies, reported back to their homeworld about humanity's strange behavior. The Zilorians, who had submitted to Confederacy demands 3 centuries ago, watched with fascination as humans simply continued their activities. Word spread through unofficial channels, whispered in trade stations and discussed in encrypted communications. A new species had received the standard Confederacy ultimatum and had done something unprecedented. They hadn't accepted or refused. They had simply continued existing as if the Confederacy's authority meant nothing. For the first time in 8,000 years, someone had questioned not just the Confederacy's decisions but their very right to make demands. The implications were staggering, and everyone in the galaxy was watching to see what would happen next. The silent treatment 40 days had passed since the ultimatum, and the Stellar Confederacy's Grand Council chamber was in chaos. Passator. Crix Theta's crystalline form flickered through dozens of colors, each representing a different emotion, none of them positive. Around the massive spherical chamber, representatives from 200 worlds buzzed, chirped, and vibrated their confusion. "This is unprecedented," declared Vornath, the ancient cephalopod from Aquaria Prime, his tentacles writhing in agitation. "In 8 millennia, no species has simply ignored us." The Confederacy's protocols were extensive, covering every conceivable response to their ultimatums. They had procedures for immediate submission, gradual negotiation, attempted bribery, military resistance, even pleading for mercy. But nowhere in their vast bureaucratic archives was there a protocol for complete non-response. Sub-Administrator Helix, a mechanical being from the Synthesis Collective, processed thousands of scenarios. In microseconds, statistical analysis suggests a 97.3% probability that humans received our message. Their quantum communication network acknowledged the transmission. They simply haven't replied. "Perhaps their translation systems malfunctioned," suggested Grix, a methane-breathing entity whose species had joined the Confederacy only 50 years prior. Crix Theta's form flashed deep purple, indicating dismissal. "We transmitted in 47 languages, including 3 Earth languages. They understood. They chose not to respond." The implications were disturbing. The Confederacy's power rested on a carefully maintained hierarchy of authority. When they spoke, the galaxy listened. When they demanded, others complied. This system had maintained order for longer than some species had existed. But if one species could simply ignore them, "We must send an investigation team," Fornath declared. "Discover what game these humans are playing." The investigation team was led by Crixus Theta personally, accompanied by the Confederacy's best xenopsychologists and cultural analysts. They stationed themselves just outside Sol System's borders, observing human activity through long-range sensors, and intercepted communications. What they found defied all logic. Dr. Yixil, a renowned psychologist from the Empathic Collective, presented her findings to Crix Theta. "Ambassador, the humans aren't preparing for war. They're not mobilizing resources or evacuating civilians. They're simply continuing." Continuing what? Everything. Their miners are still extracting asteroids. Their traders are still conducting business with non-Confederacy species. Their entertainment broadcasts continue normal programming. It's as if our ultimatum never existed. Crix Theta's form flickered uncertainly. They must have a plan, some strategy we're not seeing. The team spent weeks analyzing human behavior, intercepting communications, and studying their history. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about galactic psychology. Dr. Yixil's report was disturbing. Humans possess something we've never encountered before. They call it selective attention. They can consciously choose to ignore information they deem irrelevant, regardless of its source or importance. That's impossible, Crix Theta argued. No rational species can ignore an existential threat. That's just it, Ambassador. They don't see us as an existential threat. They see us as... Yixil paused, struggling to translate the concept. An annoyance. Like a persistent salesperson or unwanted advertising. The comparison was so insulting that Crix Theta's form turned black for a full minute before regaining control. The Stellar Confederacy, the greatest alliance in galactic history, was being treated like spam mail. Meanwhile, on Earth, Captain Rodriguez was monitoring the Confederacy's confusion with barely contained amusement. "They're scrambling," she reported to President Vasquez. "Their entire power structure depends on people accepting their authority. We're not fighting it. We're just not acknowledging it exists." The psychological impact spread beyond the Confederacy. On dozens of worlds, species that had submitted to Confederacy demands watched humanity's defiance with growing interest. The Kelvar, who had lost their moon colonies to Confederacy resource management, began questioning why they had complied so easily. The Threnodi, whose trade routes were heavily taxed by Confederacy regulations, started calculating what would happen if they simply stopped paying. Admiral Zhang Wei, Earth's military strategist, had prepared for this moment. "The Confederacy will escalate," he told his staff. "They have to. If we succeed in ignoring them, their entire authority structure collapses. They'll try economic pressure first, then diplomatic isolation, and finally military action. But humans had advantages the Confederacy hadn't anticipated. First, humanity was largely self-sufficient. Their colonies could survive without galactic trade, though it would be difficult. Second, humans had reverse-engineered enough alien technology to defend themselves, at least temporarily. And third, most importantly, humans had something no other species possessed: absolute conviction in their own autonomy. Dr. Chen explained it to the Earth Council. Every other species evolved with clear hierarchical structures. They instinctively recognize and submit to greater authority. But humans? We evolved constantly questioning authority, overthrowing it, rebuilding it. Our entire history is a cycle of rebellion against power structures. We don't have the biological programming to automatically submit. As the 50-day mark approached, the Confederacy grew desperate. They sent multiple messages, each more urgent than the last. They offered compromises, extensions, even negotiations. Each message was delivered through multiple channels, marked with the highest priority codes. Earth's quantum communication network received every message. The AI systems cataloged them, filed them, and continued normal operations. No human official even looked at them. They had better things to do, like maintaining their colonies, advancing their technology, and living their lives. The silence was becoming deafening. On trade stations throughout the sector, beings whispered about the humans who had done the impossible. They hadn't fought the Confederacy or negotiated with them. They had simply acted as if the greatest power in the galaxy was irrelevant. Some called it madness, others called it genius. The Vrek traders who dealt with humans reported something even more disturbing. The humans seemed genuinely happy. They weren't stressed about the approaching deadline or worried about Confederacy retaliation. They were going about their lives with the casual confidence of a species that had decided external authority was optional. Sub-Administrator Helix presented the most troubling analysis to the Grand Council. If humanity's approach spreads to even 2% of Confederacy member species, our entire administrative structure becomes mathematically unstable. We cannot govern those who do not acknowledge our right to govern. The Confederacy faced an impossible choice. Military action against a species that hadn't technically done anything wrong would make them look like aggressors. But allowing humanity to continue ignoring them would undermine 8,000 years of carefully maintained authority. As the deadline approached, the entire galaxy held its breath. The Confederacy had promised consequences for non-compliance. But how do you punish someone who doesn't acknowledge your right to punish them? The unexpected. Defense Day 90 arrived with the entire galaxy watching. The Stellar Confederacy's enforcement fleet, comprising 300 vessels from 50 different member species, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Admiral Thexvar, commanding from the dreadnought Inevitable Authority, expected to find Earth's defenses scrambling, their population panicking, their leaders begging for last-minute negotiations. Instead, he found something else entirely. Earth's orbital defense platforms were active but not aggressive. Commercial traffic continued flowing between Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies. The asteroid miners kept working. Most bizarrely, Earth's media was treating the arrival of the enforcement fleet as a minor news item, sandwiched between weather reports and sports scores. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Vren, "the humans have invited us to park in designated visitor zones outside lunar orbit. They've sent standard diplomatic protocols for peaceful contact." Thexvar's 6 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme confusion. They're treating a military enforcement fleet like tourists. On Earth, Admiral Zhang Wei stood in the command center, watching the Confederacy fleet with calm interest. "Implement Protocol 7, he ordered quietly. Across human space, something remarkable happened. Every human ship, station, and colony activated a new type of shielding. It wasn't aggressive, didn't threaten anyone, and violated no galactic laws. It simply made human assets impossible to lock onto with targeting systems. The technology was deceptively simple. Instead of trying to match the Confederacy's advanced weapons, humans had developed shields that broadcast quantum uncertainty fields. Any attempt to target them resulted in the targeting system becoming increasingly confused about the target's actual location. The more precise the weapon, the less effective it became. Captain Rodriguez explained it to President Vasquez. "We call it the Heisenberg defense. We're not blocking their weapons. We're just making it philosophically impossible for them to know where to shoot." The Confederacy fleet spent 6 hours trying to establish target locks on a single asteroid mining station. Each attempt resulted in their systems reporting that the station was simultaneously in dozens of different locations. Firing at any of them would be pointless, as the probability of hitting the actual target approached zero. Thexvar called an emergency conference with his fleet commanders. "Analysis of their defensive system?" he demanded. The science officer, a brilliant mollusk-like being from Scholara, rippled with embarrassment. "Admiral, their defense is based on fundamental quantum mechanics. To defeat it, we would need to violate the uncertainty principle itself. That's not military impossible, it's physics impossible." "Then we'll board their stations directly," Thexvar decided. "Physical assault troops can't be confused by quantum fields." The first boarding attempt was made on mining station Delta 7 in the asteroid belt. 50 Confederacy Marines in full combat armor approached the station, expecting either surrender or resistance. Instead, they found the station's crew having lunch. Miner Thomas Jackson looked up from his sandwich as the Marines entered. "Oh, hey there. You guys need something? Coffee machine's over there if you want some. Fair warning, though, it's the cheap stuff." The boarding commander, a warrior from the proud Krex Dominion, stood frozen. His entire military training had prepared him for combat or cowering civilians. He had no protocol for being offered coffee. "You are under arrest for violating Confederacy Resource Management Directive 7739B, he announced, trying to maintain authority. Thomas shrugged. "Don't recognize that directive, friend, but you're welcome to hang around if you want. Gets lonely out here. You play cards?" Similar scenes played out across human space. Confederacy forces would arrive to enforce compliance, only to be met with polite confusion and casual hospitality. Humans didn't resist or comply. They simply treated the enforcement actions as social visits from confused neighbors. The psychological impact on Confederacy forces was devastating. Soldiers trained for combat found themselves being offered snacks. Bureaucrats prepared to process surrenders were invited to cultural exchange programs. The entire enforcement apparatus ground to a halt, not from resistance, but from complete non-participation in the expected script. Dr. Chen observed the situation with professional interest. "We've weaponized hospitality," he told Captain Rodriguez. "They can't enforce authority on people who treat them as guests rather than conquerors." But the Confederacy wasn't without resources. Sub-Administrator Helix proposed economic isolation. Cut them off from all trade, block their communications, make them suffer economically until they comply. The economic blockade lasted exactly 3 days before it began falling apart. The Vrek, who had grown wealthy trading with humans, found creative ways to continue commerce through intermediaries. The Zilorians discovered that humans were excellent customers who actually paid on time, unlike many Confederacy species. Independent traders began running blockades, finding the human market too profitable to ignore. Moreover, humans had been preparing. Their colonies had stockpiled resources, developed alternative supply chains, and created closed-loop ecological systems. The blockade was inconvenient, not catastrophic. President Vasquez addressed Earth and all colonies on day 100. "My fellow humans, some of our galactic neighbors seem upset that we're managing our own affairs. They've sent ships to our borders and tried to restrict our trade. We want to assure everyone that this minor inconvenience won't affect our daily lives. Continue your work, enjoy your families, and remember, no external force has authority over human freedom unless we choose to give it to them." The speech was broadcast on open channels reaching every corner of the galaxy. Its casual dismissal of Confederacy power sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. On the Confederate flagship, Admiral Thexvar faced a terrible realization. "They're not going to break," he told Ambassador Crix Theta via quantum communication. "We could sit here for years and they would simply continue ignoring us." "Then use force," Crix Theta demanded, his crystalline form blazing with fury. "Fire on their stations. And start a war with a species that hasn't actually attacked us? How would that look to our member worlds? To the independent systems? We'd be the aggressors attacking peaceful miners and traders." The stalemate stretched into its second week. Confederate forces maintained their positions but took no aggressive action. Human activities continued normally. The galaxy watched in fascination as the most powerful military force in known space was effectively neutralized by a species that refused to acknowledge conflict existed. Then something unexpected happened. A small human vessel approached the Confederate flagship. It broadcast no weapon signature, no shields, just a simple message. "Admiral Thexvar, Captain Maria Rodriguez requesting permission to come aboard for tea and discussion." Against all protocol, Thexvar agreed. He was desperate for any form of engagement that might break the stalemate. Rodriguez arrived alone, carrying a thermos of coffee and a box of Earth pastries. She sat across from the six-eyed admiral in his ready room, pouring coffee as if they were old friends. "Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said calmly. "Your Confederacy seems to think you have authority over human space. We don't share that belief. Now we can continue this awkward situation where you sit at our borders making demands we don't recognize, or we can discuss something more productive." "Such as?" Thexvar asked, despite himself accepting a pastry. "Mutual, benefit, trade agreements between equals, technology exchanges, cultural programs, all the things that make galactic civilization worthwhile, just without the part where you tell us what to do. The Confederacy doesn't negotiate with non-compliant species." Rodriguez smiled. "Then don't think of it as negotiation. Think of it as two groups of beings finding common ground. No authority, no submission, just voluntary cooperation." The concept was so alien to Confederacy thinking that Thexvar's translator struggled to process it. A galaxy without hierarchical authority? Voluntary cooperation between equals? It was chaos. It was impossible. It was exactly what humanity was offering. The ripple effect news of Captain Rodriguez's meeting with Admiral Thexvar spread faster than light through quantum communication networks. The details were sparse, but the image was powerful. A single human sharing coffee with the commander of the Confederacy's enforcement fleet, discussing cooperation instead of capitulation. On Kelvar Prime, Governor Silas watched the broadcasts with growing interest. His people had submitted to Confederacy resource management 50 years ago, losing 40% of their moon colonies in the process. They had been told it was for the greater good, that the Confederacy's management would benefit everyone. Instead, they had watched their resources stripped and sold to core worlds while Kelvar citizens struggled. "What if we simply reclaimed our moons?" he asked his advisory council. "Not through war or negotiation, just moved back in." The council was shocked. The Confederacy would never allow it. The Confederacy is currently unable to make humans acknowledge their existence, Silas pointed out. What if we took the same approach? Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds. The Threnodi began recalculating their trade routes to bypass Confederacy taxation. The Yulani started questioning why they needed permission to colonize planets in their own system. The Rexa wondered why their scientific research required Confederacy approval. Ambassador Crix Theta watched his life's work beginning to unravel. The Confederacy's power had always rested on the assumption that their authority was inevitable, natural, as fundamental as gravity. But humans had proven that authority only existed if people chose to recognize it. He called an emergency session of the Grand Council. "We face the greatest crisis in our history," he announced to the assembled representatives. "If we don't act decisively, the entire Confederacy could collapse within a decade." Fornath, the ancient cephalopod, rippled with concern. "What do you propose? We can't declare war on every species that stops recognizing our authority." "We make an example of humanity," Crix Theta declared. "Full military engagement. Show the galaxy that defiance has consequences." But Sub-Administrator Helix had been running calculations. "Ambassador, I've analyzed all scenarios. Military action against Earth has a 73% probability of triggering widespread rebellion among member species. We would win the battle but lose the Confederacy." The debate raged for days. Hardliners demanded immediate military action. Moderates suggested negotiations. A few radicals even proposed reforming the Confederacy's structure entirely. Meanwhile, humanity continued its patient strategy of simply existing outside Confederacy authority. Then Admiral Zhang Wei did something brilliant. He opened Earth's defensive technologies to any species that wanted them. Not weapons, just the quantum uncertainty shields that made targeting impossible. The technology spread like wildfire through independent traders and minor species. Within weeks, dozens of small colonies and independent stations had shields that made Confederacy enforcement physically impossible. They couldn't all be ignored or blockaded. The Confederacy's enforcement mechanism was becoming obsolete. President Vasquez announced Earth's position in a galaxy-wide broadcast. "Humanity offers friendship to all species. We seek trade, cultural exchange, and mutual prosperity. What we don't seek is anyone's permission to exist. We invite all beings to join us in voluntary cooperation, free from external authority, united only by our shared desire for peace and progress. The first to officially respond was the Vrek Trade Consortium. The Vrek people choose to engage in free trade with all willing partners, without restriction or oversight. The Kelvar followed, within days simply announcing they were resuming administration of their moon colonies. They didn't ask permission or declare independence. They just started moving back in. The Confederacy fleet still sat at Sol Systems' borders, increasingly irrelevant. Admiral Thexvar found himself in an impossible position. He couldn't attack without justification, couldn't enforce compliance on beings who wouldn't acknowledge his authority, and couldn't leave without admitting defeat. Captain Rodriguez visited him again, this time bringing a chess set. As they played, she made an observation. "Admiral, your Confederacy could survive this. It just needs to evolve." "Evolve how?" Thexvar moved a piece, his 6 eyes studying the board. "Stop being an authority and become a service. Instead of demanding compliance, offer benefits. Make membership voluntary but valuable. Provide security, facilitate trade, mediate disputes, but only for those who choose to participate." That's not how galactic civilization works. It wasn't. But humanity has proven it can be. She captured one of his pieces. The old model assumed species needed to be controlled. We're proving they can cooperate by choice. The chess game became a metaphor for the larger situation. Thexvar kept trying to control the board through superior force, while Rodriguez played a fluid game of opportunities and voluntary alliances. On day 150, something unprecedented happened. 37 species simultaneously announced they were adopting the Earth model of governance. They weren't leaving the Confederacy or declaring war. They were simply choosing to interact as equals rather than as subjects. The economic impact was immediate. Trade flourished between Earth model species, free from Confederacy regulations and taxes. Innovation accelerated as species shared technology without bureaucratic oversight. Cultural exchange programs exploded as beings chose to learn from each other rather than being assigned approved cultural norms. Ambassador Crixitheta made one last desperate attempt. He traveled personally to Earth, arriving with full diplomatic ceremony. President Vasquez received him with equal ceremony, treating him as an honored guest rather than a superior authority. "You've destroyed 8,000 years of stability," Crixitheta accused. "We've offered an alternative to 8,000 years of stagnation," Vasquez replied calmly. "Your Confederacy can adapt or fade. The choice is yours. You realize some species will use this freedom for chaos, for war, and they'll face the united response of free species choosing to maintain peace. The difference is, we'll be choosing to stop them, not being ordered to." The conversation lasted 12 hours. By the end, Crixitheta understood something profound. Humanity hadn't destroyed the Confederacy through military might or clever manipulation. They had simply demonstrated that there was another way to organize. Galactic civilization. 6 months after the original ultimatum, the Stellar Confederacy held a historic vote. By a narrow margin, they chose to restructure as the Galactic Cooperative, a voluntary alliance providing services to member species who chose to participate. Authority was replaced with mutual benefit. Demands were replaced with offers. Admiral Thexvar, in his final military report, wrote, "Humanity achieved the impossible. They conquered the greatest alliance in galactic history without firing a single shot, without making a single threat. They simply refused to acknowledge our conquest of them." Earth's approach spread throughout the galaxy, not through force but through example. Species learned they could cooperate without submission, trade without permission, and prosper without oversight. The rigid hierarchies that had defined galactic civilization for millennia gave way to flexible networks of voluntary association. Captain Rodriguez, promoted to admiral for her role in the peaceful revolution, stood on the observation deck of Earth's first interstellar embassy ship. Around her, representatives from 90 species worked together, not because they had to, but because they chose to. "You know what the funny thing is?" she told Dr. Chen, who had become Earth's first galactic relations director. We didn't plan this. We just did what humans always do when someone tells us we have to do something. We ignored them. We decided for ourselves. She watched the stars, where hundreds of species were learning the same lesson. Turns out that's all freedom really is. The right to decide for yourself. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Some species clung to the old hierarchies. Others used their newfound freedom for less noble purposes. But the fundamental change was irreversible. The galaxy had learned that authority wasn't automatic, that power required consent, and that cooperation could exist without control. Humanity had given the galaxy something more powerful than weapons or technology. They had given them a simple idea that every being had the right to say no to authority they didn't choose. And sometimes the power to say no was the greatest power of all.